Now, government and business leaders are meeting this week. The Black Business Summit comes a day after we found out we're in a recession. The question is, will the two-day meeting come up with real tangible solutions to our economic crisis? Let's find out. Our business reporter Aviwe Mtila was at the summit today. He joins us now live from the newsroom. So Aviwe, first, let's tell us exactly who's attending this meeting and trying to find solutions for our very troubled economy.
Well, Shahan, simply put, we are in our worst economic performance since the global crisis back in 2008. That was the word from the Deputy Finance Minister, David Masondo, as he delivered the keynote address at that Black Business Summit today. Well, he was basically saying that all aspects of our fiscal policy are not in good condition at the moment. You'd understand that we have short revenue shortfall of about 63 billion rand as it stands. Well, in fact, the fiscus in itself needs about 1.9 trillion rands in order for its expenditures, and they've only managed to collect about 1.5 trillion of that. So that would mean that we'd essentially need to go cap in hand into debt, and that a large portion of that debt would go to ailing SOEs as well as the public wage bill, in fact. So in all of this, I got a chance to pick up with Phumzile Langeni, who was handpicked, one of the 6 people, in fact, that were handpicked by President Ramaphosa to bring in investments into the country as part of the presidential special envoy some 6 years ago. And I asked, over the last 2 years, you say you've amassed about 670 billion rand of investments, but we're not seeing them trickle through into the economy, seeing that we're in a recession at this moment. Let's listen in on what she had to say.
I think we've got to be very cognizant that firstly it takes a while for money to move from being pledged to actually being on the ground. And so it could take a year, it could take a few months, but eventually it does get on the ground. And probably what we all need to focus on a higher rate of investment. The President's clarion call of raising $100 billion is certainly making a dent, but what we need to see are fundamentals really being embedded within government. We need to see reforms. I think a lot of them have been mentioned. We've got a fiscus that's under pressure. So there are significant things that we as South Africa need to do to actually unleash that investment potential.
So what are the business leaders actually saying about the current economic crisis?
Well, the biggest crisis, the biggest barrier to our economic prospects at the moment was in no uncertain terms put to the fore that it was Eskom and its power was essentially, there were a number of suggestions, the normal talk around Eskom putting out there that it is the biggest crisis. So I got a chance to also pick up there with Linda Mabena, who is the managing director of DLO Energy Resources, basically saying that, in fact, we need to let the mining sector generate its own electricity. But let's listen in on what she had to say there as well.
If we continue on this trajectory with load shedding, there can be no growth. So I think at the top of government's to-do list should be Eskom and its restructure. We've heard a lot from government about saying we want to restructure Eskom, but it's time for that implementation. The second thing government naturally needs to do now is follow through with what was committed last month in saying that large industry and mining can now generate its own power. But there's no legal framework for it to do so right now. So if a mine, for example, wants to generate its own power, it cannot do so because the law doesn't allow it. So what is the minister saying about this and what is he doing about it? Because it is an urgent matter.
And the very controversial public wage deal, what are they saying about that?
Well, that is a very contentious issue, Shahan. You'd understand that unions have threatened civil action, basically, civil servants going to the ground if their demands aren't met, essentially if that public wage bill is slashed. But what I'm getting from what we got there from the Black Business Summit is that neither parties are backing away from government as well as the unions, because what Deputy Finance Minister David Masondo was saying there is that they'll need to have tough decisions with the unions, basically, saying that they can't afford the public wage bill. It's one of the conversations I had a chance to catch up with Teddy Doka, who is in fact one of the panelists dealing with that public wage bill. Let's listen on what he had to say.
Look, the unions are within their right to believe that, they're being used as sacrificial lambs for what happened in terms of state capture and other things where we are today. What won't change, despite how we got here, is that we still have a wage bill that is high, and we need to find ways of reducing that wage bill without resorting to more drastic areas such as huge retrenchments and all those kind of things, because this economy cannot afford to have more people not in working.
All right, we'll leave it there. Aviwe Mtila.